Welcome back to VMware View 5 Essentials Training. In this printing lesson, we're going to discuss the different options you have on how to get printers mapped into your virtual desktops. We'll talk specifically about the View location-based printing and how to get it implemented and working in your environment. Then we'll finish up by doing some walkthroughs on how to get both location-based printing working and how to pass through printers into your virtual desktop. So let's start with talking about the different options that you have. First of all, you can allow redirection of your client printers so that they show up automatically from your client device directly into your virtual desktop. This uses the virtual printing option of the VMware View agent, which is an OEM version of the ThinPrint .print technology. The .print technology is based on a universal print driver. VMware View uses this in order to be able to print to any device with a single print driver that you've installed inside the parent image. It also provides the ability to compress the print jobs in order to make the print jobs move quicker across the wire and reduce the bandwidth needed when printing. Remember, if you're passing through a printer that's attached to the client, that print job's got to traverse the wire from the virtual desktop in your data center to wherever the client machine happens to be sitting at. For users that print a lot, this could go a long way to helping to improve the bandwidth needs for your virtual desktop connection. You also have the traditional usage of login script printer mappings that can be used in Active Directory every time the user logs in. This is an approach that is familiar to most desktop administrators, since printers are oftentimes deployed through scripts in non-virtualized environments. It's by far the most flexible way of determining which printers to map, because you can use normal scripting logic and can be based on username, groups, computer name, client IP address, or any other variable that you can use in a script. You can also do it based on client information, because View will automatically pass that information from the client to the View agent and place it into the HKey current user volatile environment registry entry, thereby making it accessible to any script. You can also deploy printers through Active Directory group policy. And finally, View offers the location-based printing option, which we'll discuss now in more detail. The location-based printing offered with View is configured via group policies that are applied directly to the virtual desktops. View implements this group policy setting via a special DLL that you need to register on the machine that you're going to manage this group policy with. It's a little bit different than just using the traditional ADM template approach. This provides View administrators a special GUI designed specifically for location-based printing. When using this approach to map your printers, the printer will be mapped directly to the virtual desktop. So when a user sends a print job to the printer, it'll go straight to that printer across the network. When using this approach to map printers to your virtual desktops, the printer will be mapped directly to the virtual desktop. So all the printers mapped through location-based printing must be network printers. They must also have the print driver installed onto the virtual desktop image, since it will be talking directly to the printer. These printers are mapped during the user's login process, and you can define which printers are mapped based on a rules table that you define within group policy. We'll go into more detail on this topic in the next slide. For each row in this rules table, you'll define the printer and a combination of rules that will define where this printer should be mapped. So here's what the rules table looks like. Each row will define a certain set of criteria for when the printer will be mapped. These are the columns tinted with a white background. For each printer, you can define a range of IP addresses that belong to the client machine. This is the most likely place to configure the location-based printing. Many organizations will define a different subnet for each floor of their building, or each area of the building. If you want to define your printers based on the user's location, this is the way to do it. You can also use the client name. So as you deploy your thin clients, if you name them in specific ways to determine what building they're in or what floor they might be on, you could use this name as well. You can also use the client MAC address. This is most useful when you want to lock down a printer mapping to a very small set of client devices. Think of client devices set up in a library or in a hotel where general people can use them and they have a special printer sitting next to them. You wouldn't necessarily want these printers to show up for everybody in the organization, but just for these specific client devices. You can also limit it based on username or group. These obviously won't be location-based, unless you can define a specific group to a specific area, but can be useful if you want to map all salespeople to a specific set of printers. In addition to the criteria, each row also defines a printer's properties, including the name you want to give the printer, the driver that the printer will use, which must be installed in the parent image, and the IP port or thin print port. If you're connecting directly to a network printer, you'll need to prepend the IP address with the text IP underscore, so that the view agent knows that it's doing a direct connection to a printer, rather than using a thin print server. And finally, you can define, based on the checkbox, whether or not the printer will be the default printer. So now let's go through the steps that you need to do in order to get view location-based printing to work. As I mentioned before, all the group policy settings are defined in a DLL that needs to be registered. This DLL is the tpvm-gp-oac map.dll. There are 32 and 64-bit versions of this DLL, and they can be found on your View Connection server in the program files VMware, VMware View, Server, Extras, Group Policy Files, Thin Print directory. Then you simply need to register the DLL using regsvr32. This needs to be run on any computer that will be managing this GPO. Otherwise, you won't be able to see the proper settings. This does not need to be registered on the domain controller itself. Next, you need to create a group policy object and apply it to the OU that contains all of your virtual desktops. All the virtual desktops, of course, must have the View agent installed, and you need to make sure that the virtual printing option is selected during the agent install. This is a default setting, so unless you've changed your defaults, you'll probably be fine. Once the GPO is created, expand the software settings under Computer Configuration and select the Auto Connect Map Additional Printer for VMware View. Inside of there, you'll want to double-click the Configure Auto Connect Map Additional Printers in order to access the GUI for the view location-based printing configuration. Now let's take a look at what local printer redirection looks like within a VMware View environment. We'll start here on our client machine, and we'll look at our printers that are currently set up on this client device. You can see that Epson Stylus Photo R800 is set up there, as well as a Microsoft XPS document writer. Now let's go ahead and load up our View client. This time we'll log in as Louisa, who's a member of our call center group. Now on Louisa's desktop, let's take a look at our printers. Here you can see we have an Epson Stylus Photo R800 and a Microsoft XPS document writer, just like we had on the client device. Taking a look at the properties of this Epson printer, you can see that the printer was created by the TP Auto Connect, and that the model is a TP Output Gateway. Take a look at the Thin Print Device Setup tab. You can see several features that Thin Print automatically configures for us. Many of these other tabs are not available for us to modify, partially due to the fact that Louisa is not an administrator on this box, and also because Thin Print is blocking access to a lot of these features. On our Printing Preferences tab, you can see that it is using a thinprint.print driver, which changes the options that we have compared to what we would have on the client device. That's all it takes to do redirection of your client printers to your View desktop. Remember that when installing the View agent, you must either use the default settings or make sure that the virtual printing option is enabled during the agent installation. Now we can take a look at the location-based printer mapping available with VMware View. We're going to start off on our domain controller. I've already copied down the DLL that we will use to add the location-based printer mapping functionality into our GPO structure. You can see here that it's located on the C drive in a folder called VMware View. Our first step is to register this DLL so that we can use it within our group policy management. To do that, we'll use the regsvr32 utility and point it to our DLL. Now we've successfully registered that DLL. So now we can go into our group policy management. I've already created a View Location-Based Printers group policy. As of right now, there are no settings enabled on this group policy. So let's go in and edit it. The View Location-Based Printer Mapping functionality is located under Computer Configuration, under the Policies, and then under Software Settings, where we'll find the Auto Connect Map Additional Printers for VMware View. From there, we double-click on the Configure Auto Connect Map Additional Printers. This is the functionality that's enabled when we register that DLL. Our first step is to enable this particular functionality, which then gives us the ability to add rows. Here again, we can define IP range, client name, MAC address, or user group to explicitly define who has access to this particular printer. We'll leave these at the default settings. Now we need to identify the printer name. We'll call this printer Network Printer 01. Next, we need to enter the name of the printer driver that will need to be used. This driver needs to be installed inside of the Virtual Desktop OS. We must use the exact name that it uses. We'll be connecting to the Epson Photo Stylus R800 that's currently connected to our client machine. This is due to the fact that I only have a single printer in my lab environment with which to connect to. But you'll see that they are different connections. Now we need to identify the IP address of the client device that's sharing out this printer. Since this is not a thin print port, we need to identify it as IP underscore before we give it the IP address to identify it as a non-thin print port. And then we'll also define it to be the default printer. We'll click OK, thereby committing these settings. Back in our group policy management, we'll refresh the settings view, where we can see this registry key will now be added with this value, which contains all the information we just identified as part of that group policy. If you ever need to troubleshoot whether or not View Location-Based Printing settings are being applied to the desktop properly, you can easily check this registry setting. Now let's log into a desktop and see if this printer appears. I've now logged back in as Louisa, so let's take a look at her printers. You can see that we have our Epson Stylus Photo R800 and Microsoft XPS Document Writer from our redirection. We also now have Network Printer 01 that's been mapped to this desktop. Let's look at the properties, where we'll see that the printer was created by TP Auto Connect and is a model of Epson Stylus Photo R800. In the Advanced tab, we can see that it is using the Epson Stylus Photo R800 driver as well. So that's how you map a network printer, using the location-based printing functionality of VMware View. If you need any more information about these printing topics, you can always check out the View Administration Guide, which is going to be your best resources for any questions you may have with anything within View. You can also check out the ThinPrint GPO configuration for location-based printing. This document was originally written for View 4, but all the content still applies. You can also check out the Printing in a VMware View Environment Explained, which is found on the That's My View blog, which is generally a great resource for VMware View information. So let's wrap up with a quick review of this lesson. We started by talking about the different options that you can use for mapping printers into your users' virtual desktops. This included using a login script, using Active Directory to deploy your printers, using the thinprint.net technology to redirect printers from the client machine to the virtual desktop, and utilizing the View location-based printing functionality within Active Directory to map network printers into your View desktops. We then talked in depth a little bit more about how to set up View location-based printing, including the registration of a DLL that enables the functionality and what to do with the GPO once it is enabled. I then showed you all the steps for implementing it. And finally, we did some walkthroughs to show you what the pass-through of printers from the client device looks like, and how to set up location-based printing. So that wraps up this lesson. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.